Welcome to our new podcast series, Man to Man. My name is Dr. Kimberly Quinn, and I am here with Dr. Dave Landers and Dr. Tom Myers to facilitate this discussion. Because from what I hear from these gentlemen, there's a whole lot to say about what men are going through. I also want to just be very clear that this is ageless, right, gentlemen? We're talking about young men all the way up through. And did we want to maybe start with, Tom was asking me last night and yesterday about Dave's book.
Mm-hmm.
Is he and also which, say the title so I don't mess it up.
I wish he taught me how to shave.
Excellent. And Dave taught a course called Men and Masculinities, and so it was plural. And Tom asked me why plural. So why plural, Dave?
Yeah, and it's plural because there's not just one masculinity. There's black masculinity, there's Latinx masculinity, there's gay masculinity. And so there are all kinds of components of masculinity, and we have to understand all of them.
Mm-hmm.
So if you think about how a Latino male would respond, would be different perhaps than what a young black male would respond. And so culture dictates sometimes what we do. And so there isn't just one masculinity when we talk about it. And I think it's essential that we continue talking about it. We are losing an entire generation of young men because what we're doing is that we're stifling them and we're not allowing them to be who they are. Wow. And where does your interest come from, Tom?
Great question. Yeah, I think after spending 20 plus years in academia and teaching and having a mix of male, female in classes, to really sense that I always connected with men in that they had a sense of wanting to talk more. And again, my door was always open, but invariably every class had guys who would want to hang out after class and talk. Yeah. Through my earlier careers as an athletic coach, I always coached men, and had a strong affiliation and connection with mentoring and helping younger guys. I think what really came to bear, and one thing that became sadly apparent, is that while a professor, I had a men's discussion group every Wednesday. In fact, it was in this room.
Okay.
And listening to young men's stories, and where do you get your idea of what it is to be a man? What does masculinity mean to you, or masculinities mean to you? And it was what was really glaring was that so many of these young guys never had a mentor, never had a father figure, never had someone of a positive male role model. Yeah. So then the question subsequently became, how do you understand what it is to be a man?
If you haven't had that.
If you haven't had that.
Exactly.
I had a grandmother, or I had a single mom, or I had an uncle who helped to raise me. And it was I guess sad to know out of the small group that maybe one man had an intact family.
Yeah.
So asking, where do you get your idea of masculinity? Well, of course, the usual, the media, right? Sports, music.
Oh yeah.
Guys on campus, with a lot of bravado, and
and guys in the locker room.
In the locker room, right?
The sports thing is so. Sports and athletics are wonderful. They do great things for a lot of people. They can be really toxic and really hurtful, and I just find that fascinating. Because how do we help our students understand how valuable they are and how much they have to offer if they're silenced by the way they were raised and what media says, or sports, or coaches, that kind of stuff. But that's what happens. Yeah. And as a coach, know that the work that you've done with athletics.
So it was really amazing to understand, to not understand how skewed this all becomes. And then again, you talk about the men's issues, women's issues. Well, why do you have to have a men's issues thing? Well, gosh, we want to have loving, kind, compassionate men who treat others with respect and love and kindness.
Yeah.
We're developing men to be able to help serve others and serve themselves, but be a beacon for positive, role models to the community.
Yeah.
And that's the bottom line. And I think one of my favorite coaches is a guy named Joe Ehrman, and I'd love to have him on the show. But he's a former NFL football player, macho guy, played for the Baltimore Colts back in the 70s in a ferocious defensive line. And it was just beaten into him of male dominance.
Yeah.
And, again, as his childhood growing up, his father, again, had very physical abuse to him too. So he understood that's the way you got to be. And it's out there to kill. And he had a transformation. And turned his whole coaching philosophy. There's a number of reasons why he had this transformation, the loss of his younger brother, and kind of a spiritual awakening as well. But his whole philosophy now is love and compassion. And even coaching high school football teams, it's about love and compassion. And his group, I can't remember the name of it right off the bat. It's what used to be Coaching Within, or serving men serving others, or something. I'll have to come up with that again. But I did have a chance to meet him, and he was brought here to Burlington, Vermont by the.
I just want to jump in here, gentlemen, because
so,
because no.
So Joe Ehrman kind of changed that
No,
paradigm of what it is to be a masculine man. And
the flying though, that's because that's my role here, is the flying wall. But and part of me just wants to chuckle, because I'm also married to a wonderful man.
Yes, you are.
And I have wonderful sons and wonderful brothers-in-law and everything else. And I'll tell you, when I was first married, you talking about the relationship thing, you talk about love and compassion, and men communicating. And Tommy's wonderful. And I thought when I was first married, there must be a Rosetta Stone for this. because as a woman, you're talking about, like, we are more relational in the sense that in different conversations, Tom and I were talking, Dave and I were talking, that we just want you to tell us we're amazing and wonderful and how'd you get through this, instead of fixing all the time. And with men, and we're talking about this, it seems like it's like parallel play. And I don't mean to be condescending, because that's a toddler term, but it's like they play together separately, sort of. Like, they have to be moving, they have to be. And you were saying this earlier today, Tom, too, that they have to be busy doing something to have any kind of a conversation.
Yes.
Maybe the two of you can help us women figure that out.
Well, because if you have a daughter, you can say, what's going on if you see something going on. And she's more apt to sit down and tell you. If you have a son, he's not going to tell you. But if you go and do something with him, if you play basketball, if you take him to get an ice cream cone, if you take him out to dinner, if you go for a walk, so he's doing something physical, he's more apt to talk with you than not. And I think when you think about relationships, and we do a pretty terrible job of role modeling for young men, what is a relationship? And how do friendships work? And then how do romantic relationships work? Because we don't talk about that. We just simply don't talk about it. And that's really sad, because we're leaving a whole group of men out who want to talk, but they don't have permission. And so when we give them permission by listening to them, tell me what's going on, and genuinely caring about them and maintaining the eye contact. I used to say, when I was the head of the counseling center at St. Mike's for 23 years, I think, the biggest office expense that I had was Kleenex. Young men would come in and they would cry in my office, but boy, 5 minutes before the end of the session, they wanted to make sure they cleaned up.
Clean it up, right?
Cleaned up. No, can't deal with that. I had a young man who came in one time, and I write about him in the book. This awesome guy, and he was concerned about his dad, because his dad was overweight, his dad smoked, and his dad drank too much, and he was worried about him. And I said, do you love your dad? He goes, yes. And I said, can you tell him that? He goes, oh no, we don't do that in my family. And I said to him, this became a stock and trade for me, I said, okay, if Jane knocks on the door, my administrative assistant, and I go outside and she tells me that your father is dead, and I have to come back in and tell you, and I come back in and say to you, there's no easy way to say this, but your father has died. What would be the first thing you'd say, I wish I'd said? And he said, I wish I told him I loved him. And I picked up my phone in my office and I handed it to him. I said, you can call him right now. I'll wait outside. And he goes, I can't do that right now. It took him a month, but he did. And that's the whole thing behind the book. So the book, again, wanting to give my students a voice, I raised the issue. How did your father influence your view of what a man is? So I raised that with 30 students, 15 men, 15 women, all second semester seniors. And they shared what that had done to them. And their stories were unbelievable. And so I said, there's something here, I don't know what it is, an article, a book, something, but I'd like to keep these and I'll protect your name if, you know, and down the line, and one young man, and he's amazing, and he said, I love my dad. I know my dad loves me. We go on vacations as a family. We've got a nice house. He said he travels a lot. He's an important businessman. He said when I was a kid, he said I stole one of his business cards. And somebody said, what did your dad do? And he said, I whipped out my Spider-Man wallet, and there was what my dad did. And he said, but he was gone a lot. And he said, I didn't realize until I wrote this essay how much my mom did behind the scenes. He said, there were 3 of us. We were all into sports. We all played hockey. And we used to fight like cats and dogs, and she had to take care of all that because he was gone. And he said, I remember watching movies and watching on television with the father standing in front of the sink, in front of the mirror, with the son, with the shaving cream. And he said, I just wish he taught me how to shave. And I was like, that's the name of the book. And that's where the book came from.
Yeah, and when I'm reading your book, and what really resonated with me is the students' accounts of their memories of their dads, and all the little things. Well, maybe seeing the dad cry, in the driveway with that, but the little tiny things that kids remember.
Oh, yeah.
And so for my 2 sons, I think about the time that I've spent a lot of time with them, and just like I wonder I realize that they remember everything. Every interaction, every car ride, every all the things we talk about and
They're
we've
just
done.
watching you all the time.
Yeah. It's just wow, how important that is for children to have memories of their dads, and how the little things you do, the little the macaroni and cheese that I make or whatever that might be is insignificant at the time. But a lifetime later, they remember that. They remember those little things.
And I had a young man whose father had cancer. And the last chapter of the book is The Good Dads. And he had written about his father and what the struggles were with his father going through cancer. And his father was not doing well. And he knew that I had included him in the book. And his essay about his dad was incredible. And I had encouraged my students, if they could, if it was appropriate, to share their essays with their parents. And some could, obviously some could not. And so he came to me after he had graduated probably a year, and he said, my dad's not going to make it. And he said, I want him to know that he's in the book. And I had a draft of the book at that time. It wasn't done. And I gave him a copy of the draft, which he took home and shared with his dad.
Wow.
I have a question, gentlemen.
Yes.
You ready? It's like a okay. In your collective opinions, in 2022, which is what it is, last I checked, right? What do you think the number 1 struggle? I know there are more than one, but like the biggie, the number 1 struggle with young men today is the biggest shutdown. You know what I mean?
Who am I? They're trying to figure out, who am I? They don't know, because they get messages from TV, they get messages from movies, they get messages from politicians, they get messages from anything that they buy about but they're saying, who am I? And the other part of that is, how do I figure it out?
What do you think, Tom?
Yeah, I think there's a longing for more answers and to be able to connect with older generations. I think something that I noticed with this Generation Z in teaching with and working with them is they are risk averse. They are afraid to fail. They don't want to look stupid. They don't want to look afraid to fail. So nowadays, if you're in class and you ask a question, I have to give them a little bit of time so they can go online to look at YouTube or find something really quick,
Mhm.
so they can talk about it and feel competent, not off the top of their head.
Yeah, because they're hesitant to do that right off the top of their head. Yeah.
And I think layered with who am I and how
How to figure it
how
out.
to figure it out is this overarching pressure of you've got to be successful. You've got to not look stupid. You've got to be competent. And so there's that added pressure
Yeah.
of not opening yourself up to potential failure or potential opportunity to learn in that case.
And because today, again, going back, this is 2022, the concept of being vulnerable, because vulnerable equals weak, and you cannot be or be seen as weak. And the other part is there's a whole generational thing that goes on. So if they're looking to their fathers to have, and this is not a slam on fathers. Fathers do the best job they know how to do. It doesn't mean they're doing the best job. So, that's why the chapter on crying and tears, so many of the students said, the only time I've ever seen my father cry was when their mother or father died. And I never saw it, so I didn't cry. And what the women said, which was fascinating too, is women said, I want to marry somebody just like my father. And other women said, I don't want to marry anyone like my father. And so when you try to help them understand the generational perspective, when that generation above them didn't necessarily have really good role models either.
They're doing the best they know.
They're doing the best they know. Exactly.
What they know.
I was really struck by the story of the young guy whose mom passed away, and they're standing there with a casket. And the kid, how old was he? He was just 9 or and wanted to cry, and his brother said, "Don't you cry, not in front of you. Suck it up."
The youngest of 10 kids. Mom dies when he's a junior, or mom dies when he's a senior in high school, and dad when he's a freshman at St. Mike's. And his siblings said, "Do not cry."
And here's another thing. This led me to here because there's so much of the, it's like the messages that they're all getting and everything. And I'm thinking about our youngest son when he was in high school playing football. And here's the thing, and I'll give my wonderful husband, to me, he's like the picture for masculinity because he's strong and takes care of his family, yet give him a chick flick and he gets into it, and he tells the kids he loves them all the time. And so yes, in Aiden, our youngest son, he brought home his freshman football pictures and they were undefeated and all more. And so he brings all these pictures to me, and he's got this face that could crack you down the middle. It's like ferocious. It's like a Marine at his worst day in boot camp. And I said, Aiden, I paid $42 for these pictures. Where's the smile? And he's not getting it from us, is the point.
You can't smile.
He said, you don't smile. You don't smile at football pictures.
Smile.
And I'm like, but that was that actually did a light bulb thing for me. So I'm like, that didn't come from me or your dad.
No.
So wild. And I have another question, unless you want to comment on that.
Well, there was a young man at St. Mike's who was very active in student affairs and a great guy and a great leader. He was on the baseball team. And in a conversation with him, he had a 4.3 of his last 4 semesters. And because I was working with all the teams, I knew that, and I was congratulating him on that. And he said, "You can't tell anybody." I said, "What do you mean I can't tell anybody?"
Because you're smart.
He said, "Because athletes are not supposed to be smart." And what an indictment.
Wow.
But that was his mentality. He was begging me. He said, "You cannot tell any of my friends or my teammates that I've gotten a 4.3 of the last 4 semesters. It had to be a secret." And that's I find really sad. The other thing which ties in is I have a former student, Craig and his wife Colleen, and they have a little girl, Everson, who calls me Grandpa Dave. And they were determined that they were going to raise a gender-neutral child. So her name is Everson, Eversen, not O-N, Everson. And she's delightful. And mom and dad are both cross-country people, and they go biking, and they do all this kind of stuff. Everson wanted nothing to do with bicycles, which really upset them because they wanted to do it as a family, until she saw a pink bike. Didn't come from them.
That's just strange.
And now everything that she has is pink. And when this happened, when she said she wanted a pink bike, and Craig called and goes, "What have we done wrong?" I said, "Nothing. Nothing.
Yeah.
He goes, but we want her to be a gender neutral child. And I said, you want her to be a happy child. She wants pink.
Right.
Give her pink.
And many boys, and obviously will if they, because we didn't give our kids guns or anything, like plague, violent stuff. They'll make, actually I think you had cowboy ones once, but anyway, we weren't into that, buying violent video games or anything.
Right.
Some boys will make that out of a stick, like if the parents don't, so there's something.
Well, here's the story, the actual story that happened. And so we have, I have a son who's in the military. He was enlisted in the Army as infantry. He's now, he is now a federal law enforcement officer at a very big building in DC.
Oh, sorry.
Can't say exactly where, but that, So again, when he was a little dude, and his friends whose parents were, again, no guns, no weapons whatsoever, and a little Johnny or a little Joey, whoever it is, we don't play with guns, we don't do that stuff. Well, lo and behold, you'll turn around, they're all sitting around having lunch with their peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, and what do they eat? Their crust to make into a gun,
right.
And they're pointing guns at each other, and it's like that natural affinity for young men to be protectors, and to have power. And so, again, parents were aghast at that.
And isn't that primal?
It's a kind of a primal thing with
like
their,
we were ducking into
peanut
caves
butter and jelly
back.
crust as a
The
pistol.
question is, where does that come
survival,
from?
though.
Exactly.
Because women were childbearing way back when there were, saber-tooth tigers and raptors and.
But men are also raised to be problem solvers. When I was an administrator, and so I was a director of the center, and I had 7 people who worked for me. And I would have some of the women, and I was the only man, at one time I was the only man working in the office. And women come in to talk, and I learned very quickly, they just wanted me to listen. They didn't want me to solve the problem. They could solve it themselves.
Stop fixing.
They just needed me to listen. And once I realized that, I was like, things went much better.
It's taken my wonderful husband about 20 out of the 30 plus years we've been married to figure that out,
But
because
he's
he
used
wants
to that.
to
That's
fix.
what he's expected.
And actually, there are other times where I do want him to fix things, like when it's because he's really good at it, especially finding things. So I have zero patience, so he's really good with that. But if something happens like that's like somebody was snarky in that day or so, where I'm like, just listen, tell me I'm amazing,
Yes.
and bring me some hot tea.
Yes.
Hence
Stop
the book, Women Are from Mars, Men Are from Venus. Right?
Yeah, and that book was a little bit tossed aside.
Don't fix anything,
there's
just listen.
Just listen.
There's definitely some truth. There's kind of tossed aside, but there's definitely some truth in that.
And it is so interesting because you just have this innate, this is what you got to do. If
Right.
my wife is talking about, something, whatever, here's what you do. I got to fix it. No. Just.
But again,
listen.
if we're not
But there's an
teaching,
impulsive feeling to
if we're not teaching young men, you don't have to fix it. If we're not teaching our young women that if you want just to be listened to, you have to be able to say, I don't want you to solve this. I just want you to listen to me. But if we're not teaching the women to say that,
Right.
and we're not teaching the men that they don't have to solve every
See,
problem.
but that
then what are we
violates the
doing?
woman code. This is the whole problem. Because if we have to tell you, it's no longer meaningful. So if you don't know it on your own, then we're just pissed. So,
But we don't know it on our own because no one's taught us that.
right, but you have to figure it out.
So how are we going to figure it out? And
I
that's
don't
why
know.
we're
That's
doing
why we're having the podcast.
That's why we're doing the podcast.
So I was saying to Tom earlier, I don't know if I ever mentioned this to you, Dave. I was on the way in here probably, and I forget what radio show it was, but they were saying that the number one thing that irritates wives. So I'm like waiting because I'm thinking of lots of things that irritate wives, and the number one was when there's something to be done, whether it's the laundry, the lawn, or whatever it is, and the husband doesn't do it, and then you'll say, honey, like the lawn's up to here, or the laundry, or the dishes, or something, and he'll say, but you didn't ask me to, or you didn't tell me to, and we're like, isn't the clue that the laundry, and it was so true. Like you can pick up the dry cleaning because you just know that like, and there's no clearance to the tower.
But it goes back to not just having to teach men you don't have to be the problem solvers, but it really is teaching women. If you want something, you have to understand that the men in your life have been raised or socialized or whatever it is, that they've got to be problem solvers. And so women, you've got to be able to say, just listen.
Yeah, but I told you that's not meaningful. we want the men to just instinctively know that.
And that doesn't
Run a
happen.
hot bath, bring us a glass of wine in the tub, and tell us we're amazing.
No.
We just do the script.
But if you tell us that's what you need.
Yeah, but then I told you that's like if you don't think of it on your own.
I know.
They definitely get better.
What culture are you living in, Kim?
The female one. Right. So it's kind of, if they would just get that, our lives would be so much more pleasant.
And the reality is they're not going to.
It does come, it just takes a few decades, but they get there. And I have another question, just because it's the pilot, and we're trying to be all inclusive in general, of course, but also with the age thing, since this is the first one. Probably, I'm gonna guess we'll get more specific as episodes go. But so for the midlifers, because we are wonderfully seasoned, what do you think is, I'm gonna guess it's different. I don't know, I've never been male, but I'm gonna guess it's different, because it's different for women as young to midlife, right? So it's probably not, maybe context different. What do you think is the number one hardest thing for a man in his midlife as far as struggle, like top number one?
For personal standpoint, I think it's the feeling that haven't accomplished enough yet. You're not there yet, even though your career has gone well, maybe at midlife, but still always striving, always feeling
Always
I have to
striving,
strive.
I got that.
And I think it can be a struggle, and certainly there are times are changing. We went through a serious pandemic that put a crimp in so many aspects of our lives that it upended things. And so I think for a lot of guys, I mean, personally speaking, there's so much more that needs to be done that we want to do that is striving. And I think with men, our work is our identity. And
totally.
for our career. So all of a sudden you get upended and your career is no longer the trajectory that you expected. There's an incredible level of self-worth and self-esteem that is punctured by this lack of a career or not having an identity.
Yeah.
And I know my wife and I talk about it, and it's hard to hear, and she can say, that it's not, don't have yourself tied up in your work, but I think it's who I am, it's what I love, and it is, it's my purpose.
And it's hard.
And it's hard when you don't have this,
And our lives have been structured so that's what we do.
That's so different from
And,
women.
and for me, I'll be 79 in a couple of weeks. So midlife for me was a long time ago. But I was very blessed because when I was 30, I realized why I was here on this planet. And so now, at almost 79, I'm looking back, it's like, have I done that?
Oh,
That's so Eric Erickson.
Yeah.
And that's just, and I have, but I don't pay attention to that. And so when people say nice things about me, I'm like, oh yeah, okay. There've been a couple of parties for me, and it's like, and somebody came up and said, you do know this party's for you, don't you? and I ignore that, but I think looking back, and then, because the other thing for those of us who are much older adults, part of it is, how much more time do I have left?
Yeah. So what was it at 30 that you said was
helping other people? That was my job. That was my job. Was helping other people. And what that ended up being is helping especially young people to understand that they are better than what they see. And so a lot of what I do is, and I'll say to somebody, if you can see yourself half as much as I do, and they didn't believe in themselves because society beats them down, both men and women.
Exactly.
I mean, it's incredible what we do to young people. So
Tom and I have said it too, and the three of us are the same. As we said this just in the parking lot last week or something. Our number one thing with the spreading positivity, which is just like you, Dave, and when you come right down to it, we want to kind of channel, for lack of a better word to say it, helping people see their value.
Yes. Yeah.
And the context might change, but that's the core of.
Yeah. And as you said, Dave, too, it's just the inherent strengths and abilities that people have that they don't see.
Right.
And we can see it. I think we're maybe gifted in this area.
Yeah.
But you see the strength, you see the personality, you see the beauty of other people, and just help you realize and pull that out. And I think, as you said, Kim, see for them to see their value.
And we have a role in that. And probably my best example was a young man. He was a sophomore. He was a sophomore hockey player, and it was my abnormal psych class. We were doing one-on-one. You're the counselor, you're the counselee, that kind of stuff. And then switch, and I'm walking around listening. And at the end of class, I had noticed that this young man, and I knew his name, but I didn't really know him. And I said, "Can I see you for a minute after class?" And he said, "What did I do wrong?" Which is we know is natural. And I said, "I'm not sure what your major is, but I said, I've been watching you, and you've done an amazing job as a listener and a caregiver in helping somebody come to a solution." He will say to this day, and he's now an osteopathic orthopedic surgeon in the state of Washington. And he will say the first time in his life that he ever got any reinforcement for anything other than the fact he was a hockey player was when I said that to him.
Wow.
I can see there's all kinds of conversation to have here.
I mean, it's amazing because all of his life, all the reinforcement he'd gotten were because he played hockey.
Measure up.
And he would walk up and introduce him to, "Hi, I'm so-and-so, and I play hockey," because that was his identity.
Right.
And when you deal with athlete identity, which is a relatively new concept that we've been working on the last couple of years, it is fascinating because those messages are there. I mean, he was 20 years old and he'd never gotten reinforcement for being a really good listener and a problem solver and a member of a community and everything else. He hadn't gotten any reinforcement for that at all, only for the fact that he played a sport.
Hockey.
Of course, on the female end, you would get tons of "you're a good listener" if you were a good listener.
Yeah.
And at last, you could be a stellar athlete, and you might not hear that as much.
Right.
It's just wild.
But what women had to put up with was you're not pretty enough, or you're too heavy, or there's something wrong with you. And now men are getting the same kinds of things. And again, that's relatively new, last maybe 10 years.
I think it's getting better.
It is getting better, but I was recently talking to my niece, and her daughter was getting the same kinds of messages from grandmother that she had gotten from her mother, which is, if you don't do something about your weight, nobody's ever going to love you, nobody's ever going to marry you. And and again, we go back to the generational component, because that's why I think however many episodes of this you have, the generational thing is so important for us to understand.
We're going to have a lot of big talk. Just before we wrap up here, I just want to say with the weight thing, the papers I just read, which were amazing, the happiness advantage, I can't wait to read what they write, because it's Sean Akers' way, but it's just so good, and there's lots of area for personal application if they so choose. And the weight thing came up with some of my young men.
Yeah.
They didn't say it in the classroom.
Yeah, no.
But it was in the papers. One of them actually touched on a little bit, but way more.
Yeah.
Or in the papers over the past years with students, that it's not like the classic 15-year-old girl with anorexia. Boys also have body dysmorphia and maybe not even on that level, but just very self-conscious.
Well, they also have muscle dysmorphia. So I had a young man he was jacked. I mean, he was in incredible shape. In his mind, though, he wasn't big enough.
Yeah.
And he ended up then taking drugs so that when he did the lifting, he could get bigger. But anybody who looked at him would go, "You are jacked." He wasn't.
You don't see it.
He doesn't see it. And that's the same with eating disorders. You don't see what everybody else sees. So.
And I've had young men here with eating disorders. One of them was so bad he had to. This is like 10 years ago, so it wouldn't be no identifiers or anything. But he had to go home to his family in the Midwest because he was very thin. He was covering it up in these big shirts and everything like that.
Personal family member, a man who went through anorexia. Yeah. And the dysmorphia is just, and again, it's devastating.
And add on to that, the shame that's involved if it happens, because women are supposed to get eating disorders, not men.
That's what I'm saying.
So if you have an eating disorder and you're a male, you don't want anybody to know that. You don't want anybody to know that, because again, that makes you vulnerable, and vulnerable equals weak.
Which feeds into the whole reason there's an eating disorder.
Exactly.
But I love the topic, and for our next time to talk about the generational piece.
Yeah.
I think it's so vital to go from that, birth to death.
Yeah.
And I can tell some amazing stories about men later in life that have, so again, for another time, but I think it's really vital to begin in that.
I'd say this is a pretty good pilot,
I think so
right?
too.
Pretty man to man.
So
we will, for our listeners here again, Dr. Dave Landers, Dr. Tom Myers, and Dr. Kimberly Quinn, and I'm going to put their information at the bottom here, for in case if you want to reach out to them, you're welcome to do so.
Absolutely.
And okay, well, thank you for listening.